The baby had not nursed in 2 days. His lips were blue, his tiny chest was still. Mama Sarah whispered, her voice sharp with panic. "He is not breathing." Clara screamed. She shook him. Nothing. Then a stranger knelt beside her, pressed his mouth to the infant's face, and breathed. Once, twice, 5 times. On the 5th breath, baby William coughed. But what Clara did not know yet was that this stranger carried secrets darker than the winter that nearly killed them all. This is the story of the winter that broke everything, and the cowboy who stopped when no one else would. The wind sang through the cottonwoods like a mourning voice, low and cracked, pulling snow from the branches in lazy spirals. It had not stopped snowing for 7 days. The world outside the sagging cabin had narrowed to white, and silence so quiet it hurt the ears like something holy had died, and no one dared speak of it. Inside, the air was thick with cold. The last of the firewood had burned down to ash sometime in the night. Frost crept along the window panes like veins, spreading its fingers across the glass, until the outside world became nothing but a blur of white. Every breath made a little cloud, a small ghost, hanging in front of their mouths before it vanished into the bitter air. Clara Whitmore sat on the floor with her back against the wall, arms wrapped around herself, her body curled inward like a wounded animal. Her skirts were stiff with ice at the hem. Her fingers were cracked and bleeding where the cold had split the skin. She was 28 years old, but in this moment she felt ancient, hollowed out, like the wind had blown through her and taken everything soft with it. The children were piled together under the quilt, all 5 of them, limbs tangled, too cold to cry anymore. Sarah, the oldest at 12, held the twins close to her chest, her face pale and drawn eyes too old for a girl her age. Thomas, 9 years old, lay curled at the edge, his jaw clenched even in sleep, as if fighting battles in his dreams. Emma and Eliza, the 6-year-old twins, had stopped shivering hours ago. That was the dangerous part. Clara knew it. When the shivering stopped, it meant the body had given up trying to warm itself. And baby William, 8 months old. His little body was light and still beneath the layers. He had not nursed in 2 days. Clara had tried, but there was nothing left in her. Her body had stopped producing milk when the food ran out. She had not checked his breathing in hours. She could not yet. Because if she checked and found nothing, if she pressed her ear to that tiny chest and heard only silence, she did not know what she would do. She did not know if she could survive that knowledge. So she sat, and she waited, and she tried not to think about the cold creeping closer, inch by inch, claiming her children, one by one. Snow scraped across the roof like fingernails. The door was swollen shut with ice. Somewhere beyond it lay the trail. If you followed it long enough, it led down into town 15 miles through the forest, where there were people and bread ovens and light. But that was a different world now. They had no horse, no sleigh, just each other and the cold, and Henry. Her husband had left 7 days ago. Clara closed her eyes and let the memory rise, even though it hurt. He had stood in the doorway that morning, the sky behind him heavy and gray with the promise of snow. His coat was the good one, the one she had mended twice last winter. His boots were sturdy. The mule was packed with enough supplies for the journey. "Just need to get to Hebron," he had said, not quite meeting her eyes. "They will help. I will bring food. Just hold on." She had wanted to believe him. She always wanted to believe him. That was her great weakness, the soft place in her that he had exploited again and again for 10 years of marriage. Henry Whitmore had a gift for making promises sound like scripture. His voice would drop low and certain, and his eyes would find hers, and for just a moment she would forget all the other promises he had broken. "I will build you a house, Clara. I will stop drinking, Clara. I will never hit you again, Clara. Montana is the answer, Clara. Land cheap, sky wide. You will see." She had stood in that doorway 7 days ago, holding baby William in one arm, and watched her husband disappear into the white. The mule's hooves left perfect little prints in the fresh snow. She had waved, she had smiled, she had believed. That was Sunday. It was Friday now. The woodpile was gone. The flour barrel scraped bottom 3 days ago. The matches ran out yesterday. and her hope, what little she had scraped together, had thinned out like the light through a snow cloud. "He is not coming back," a voice whispered in her mind. "You know it. You have always known it." Clara's head tipped forward. Her chin touched her chest. Her body wanted to sleep. It would be so easy. She could lie down beside her children and just not get back up. Let the cold take her quiet and peaceful. Let it end. She had tried so hard. For 10 years she had tried. She had followed Henry from Missouri to Montana. Territory had borne him 5 children, had endured his fists and his failures and his empty promises. She had sewn and scrubbed and scraped to keep them alive. And now, at the end of everything, she was too tired to fight any more. Her eyes drifted closed. Just a moment's rest. Just a moment. But then she heard it. At first she thought it was her heart again thudding in her ears. But no, it came again. A low, muffled sound, distant but distinct. The crunch of snow under weight. Movement. Clara forced her eyes open. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else, heavy and unresponsive. She crawled to the door, her palms leaving wet prints on the frozen floor, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her fingers fumbled at the latch. It would not budge. Ice had sealed it shut. She kicked once with her boot. The door did not move. She kicked again harder, the impact jarring up through her leg. Nothing. The third time she threw her whole body against it, and the door cracked open with a sound like breaking bones. A gust of wind punched through, blinding her with snow, stealing the breath from her lungs. She staggered back, coughing, eyes streaming. Through the flurry, a shape moved. It was not real at first, just the idea of a man. A hat dark against the white, shoulders hunched against the wind. Behind him a horse, its breath billowing in thick clouds. He stopped a few yards away and looked at her. Clara opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her throat felt sealed with ice, her voice frozen somewhere deep inside her chest. Her hands trembled at her sides. The children were still inside. All of them. She needed to protect them. She needed to be strong. But she could barely stand. The man spoke first. His voice was low, rough, tired. "Who is in there with you?" She tried to answer. Failed. Tried again. "Children," she rasped. The word came out broken, barely audible above the wind. The man nodded once. Then he turned and walked to his horse. For one terrible moment Clara thought he was leaving. That he had seen her, seen the desperation in her eyes, and decided she was not worth the trouble. It would not have been the first time. People looked away from suffering all the time. It was easier than helping. But he did not ride away. Instead, he pulled a burlap sack from his pack. Then another. Then a small bundle of firewood wrapped in oilcloth. His movements were careful. Slow. Like someone who knew what frostbite felt like and was trying not to make it worse. "I am coming in," he said, not asking. He stomped his boots on the threshold, knocking loose the snow, then stepped inside. Clara backed away to let him pass. She watched him take in the room with a single look, his eyes moving quickly, assessing. The curled bodies under the quilt. The empty hearth full of cold ash. The color of her face, which she knew must be gray as death. "I will make a fire," he said. She could not speak, could not move, could only watch as he knelt before the hearth and began to work. His hands were big, calloused. There was an old scar across the knuckles of his right hand, white against the weathered skin. He was not young, not old, somewhere in between. His face was the kind that had seen hard weather and harder years, lined and lean, shadowed by several days of beard. He took the flint from inside his coat and struck it against the steel. Once. Twice. On the third try, a spark caught the dry kindling he had packed in oilcloth. The flame was small at first. A whisper. It flickered and nearly died, and Clara held her breath, willing it to live. Then it caught hold and began to grow, licking up the wood, crackling softly. She had not realized how dark the cabin had become until light returned. The man fed the fire carefully, adding wood piece by piece, building it up until the flames danced strong and steady. Smoke spiraled up through the chimney. Warmth began to creep across the floor. The children stirred under the quilt. One of them coughed. A small sound, but it meant breathing. It meant life. The man reached into his coat again and pulled out a tin of beans and a hard loaf of bread wrapped in wax paper. He held them out to Clara. Her fingers were too stiff to take them at first. He waited, patient. Then he pressed the food gently into her hands, closing her cracked fingers around the tin. "There is more on the horse," he said. Clara nodded. She clutched the tin against her chest like it was something sacred, something holy. Her lips cracked and bled when she tried to smile. "Name is Brennan," he added, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Samuel Brennan. Most folks call me Sam. I was passing through when I saw smoke a few days back. Then it stopped. Figured maybe someone needed help." She stared at him. Her eyes were hollow, sunken, the eyes of a woman who had stopped expecting anything good. "Why would you stop?" she asked, her voice rough as gravel. He met her gaze, even and still. No pity in his expression, no judgment, just a simple truth. "Because I would want someone to stop too." Then from the pile of children beneath the quilt a sound emerged, or rather a lack of sound. Sarah's voice, sharp with panic. "Mama, the baby. He is not breathing." Clara's blood turned to ice. She scrambled across the floor, her numb limbs suddenly forgotten, and tore back the quilt. Baby William lay there, his face pale as wax, his lips tinged with blue. His tiny chest was still, completely still. "No." Clara gathered him up, shaking him gently. "No, no, no. William, William, please." The baby did not respond, did not move, did not breathe. Sam was beside her in an instant. "Let me see him." Clara did not want to let go. This was her child, her baby. But her hands were shaking too hard to help, and Sam's voice was calm, steady, certain. She handed William over. Sam laid the baby on the floor near the fire where the warmth was strongest. He tilted the tiny head back, clearing the airway. Then he leaned down, covered the baby's nose and mouth with his own lips, and breathed. Once, gently. The small chest rose. He pulled back. The chest fell. No breath followed. He breathed again, and again, and again. Clara knelt beside him, her hands pressed over her mouth, her whole body shaking with silent sobs. The other children watched with wide, terrified eyes. "Please," Clara whispered. "Please, God. Please." On the fifth breath, baby William coughed. It was a tiny sound, weak and wet, but it was the most beautiful sound Clara had ever heard. The baby coughed again, then let out a thin, reedy wail. His face scrunched up, turning from blue to pink to angry red. He was breathing. He was crying. He was alive. Clara snatched him up and held him against her chest, rocking back and forth, tears streaming down her face. She was crying now, finally crying, the sobs tearing out of her like something that had been trapped for years. Sam sat back on his heels, his own face pale, his hands trembling. And in the firelight, Clara saw something she had not expected. Tears. On the face of this stranger who had just saved her son's life. She did not ask why. Not then. But she filed it away, that glimpse of grief in his eyes. There was a story there, a wound that had never healed. For now, though, all that mattered was the warm weight of her baby in her arms, the steady rise and fall of his tiny chest, the miracle of breath. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure if she was speaking to Sam, or to God, or to both. "Thank you." Sam just nodded, his jaw tight, and turned back to feed the fire. When the room had warmed enough that breath no longer hung visible in the air, Clara sat near the hearth and opened the tin. The children were waking now, blinking like pups, their faces confused and wondering. Sarah was the first to sit up, her eyes finding the stranger by the fire, then moving to her mother. "Who is he?" Sarah asked, her voice thin and wary. "Help," Clara said. It was the only word she could manage. She passed the food to the children first, watching each bite with fierce attention as if willing it to stitch them back together. Thomas ate in great hungry gulps. The twins nibbled slowly, their hands trembling. Sarah fed small pieces of softened bread to baby William, who gummed it weakly but swallowed. Only once they had all eaten did Clara tear a corner of bread for herself. She chewed slow. The taste was nothing special, just flour and salt and survival. But it settled in her belly like heat, like hope. The silence stretched between them, Clara and this stranger named Sam, filled only with the crackle of flames and the slow chewing of half-frozen mouths. Then he asked, soft and careful, as if the words might break something. What happened to their father? Clara's jaw tensed. Her hands stopped moving. Went for help, she said. She hesitated. 7 days ago. Sam nodded once. Said nothing. She looked up at him, searching his face for something. Pity, maybe, or judgment. She found neither. You think he is dead? He met her eyes. Not cruel, not kind, just honest. I think if he is not, he is lost. Her shoulders dropped. The weight of that truth settled into her bones. She turned her face back to the fire and said nothing more. They sat like that for a long time, the fire crackling between them, the children falling back into exhausted sleep, the world outside still howling with wind and snow. Later, when the storm eased enough to see the yard, Sam brought in more supplies from his horse. 2 more sacks of food, a wool blanket thick and warm, smelling of horse and trail dust, a tin of coffee. He unpacked everything slowly, laying things out neat, precise. Clara noticed the way he moved, not like a man who owned much, like someone who respected what he carried. Every item had a place. Every motion had purpose. My name is Clara, she said finally. Clara Whitmore. He looked at her, nodded once. Pleased to know your name, Mrs. Whitmore. She studied him, then really looking for the first time. Sun-worn skin stretched over strong bones, eyes like dust and river rock, gray-blue and steady. His coat was patched in places, mended with careful stitches. His boots were good, well-oiled and sturdy, the kind of boots that had walked a long way and meant to keep walking. What were you doing out here? She asked. He shrugged one shoulder. Looking for work. Maybe a quiet place to winter. You picked the wrong place. He almost smiled at that. The corner of his mouth twitched upward for just a moment before settling back into stillness. Almost seemed so. The wind howled outside, rattling the window, pushing against the walls. The storm had eased, but not passed. There would be no leaving tonight. Maybe not tomorrow either. Clara looked at her children, then at the stranger warming his hands by the fire she could not have made herself. She did not trust easily. Not any more. Henry had cured her of that. But for now, this man had brought light back into the room. That was enough. For now, that had to be enough. The next morning broke without sun. Just a pale gray light bleeding through the frost-covered window, thin and cold, like the world had forgotten how to be warm. Snow still drifted past in lazy flurries, but the worst had passed. It was the kind of cold that settled in deep bone cold, the kind that made your joints ache and your teeth hurt. But the wind had stilled, and that was something. Sam was already outside when Clara woke. She pushed herself up from the corner where she had slept, every muscle protesting, and wrapped herself in the blanket he had brought. Through the sliver of open door, she could see him in the yard. He was digging, not frantic, not desperate, just steady, methodical. Shovel pause breath, shovel again. He was clearing a path to the shed where Henry had kept the traps, the broken plow, the tools he never fixed. The trail, too, would need clearing. If anyone was to leave or come, there had to be a way through. He worked like it mattered, Clara thought, watching him. Like it was his land, too. Inside, the children ate thin porridge over the fire, the last of the oats stretched with water and a bit of salt. Baby William had taken some warmed goat's milk mixed with ash-bark tea, still weak but better. His color was improving. His eyes tracked movement now, following Clara's face when she leaned over him. She kept one hand on him almost constantly, afraid he would disappear if she looked away. By mid-morning, Sam returned, snow up to his thighs, a glisten of sweat at his brow despite the cold. He hung his coat on a nail by the door and crouched to unlace his boots. You did not have to do that, Clara said. He looked at her, not blinking. You have 5 little ones here. You will need that trail sooner or later. She did not argue, just nodded and stirred the fire. He glanced around the cabin, his eyes lingering on the corners, the gaps in the walls where wind slipped through. You have a root cellar. She gestured toward the far corner. Under the floorboards, nothing left but turnips and frozen air. He grunted. Still worth checking. Later that afternoon, Clara found herself outside behind the cabin, chipping at the ice in the water barrel with the back of the axe. Her sleeves were soaked to the elbow, her arms aching from the work. She had not heard Sam come up behind her until he took the axe from her hands. She stepped back, teeth clenched. "I can manage," she said. "I did not say you could not." He broke the ice in 4 clean blows, then dipped the bucket and handed it to her. Water sloshed cold onto her skirt. They stood in silence for a moment, steam curling from their mouths. "My husband was not always like that," Clara said suddenly. The words came out before she could stop them, rising from somewhere deep inside her, from the place where she had kept all her secrets locked away for years. Sam did not answer. He just waited, his face patient, his eyes steady. "He meant well," she continued, her voice distant. "Always chasing something, a scheme, a promise. He said Montana was the answer. Land cheap, sky wide. So we came." She looked down at her hands, red and raw, the skin cracked and bleeding at the knuckles. "He promised a lot." Still, Sam said nothing. Clara let the silence hang for a moment, then added quieter than before, "And when it did not work, he turned hard, drank when he could, hit when he thought no one was looking." She paused, swallowing against the tightness in her throat. "Not bad. Not enough to leave. Just enough to make me think it was my fault." She took a breath, the cold air sharp in her lungs. "Then the snow came and he left. Said it was for us. Said he would bring help. I believed him." Sam looked past her toward the tree line where snow hung heavy on the pines, white against green against gray sky. "You still think he is coming back?" Clara shook her head. "Not anymore." The wind stirred again, lifting loose snow from the ground and swirling it between them. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara found Sam sitting outside on the stump near the woodshed. He had a rifle across his lap, not loaded, just resting there. His breath made clouds in the darkness, and his eyes were fixed on something far away that she could not see. She brought him coffee in the tin cup and sat beside him on an overturned crate. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once but did not look at her. They stared out into the dark together, the stars barely piercing through the thinning clouds. The world was silent. Still, the kind of quiet that made you feel small. "You have family?" she asked. He took a long time before answering. "Had a brother once. Jacob. Went out to California 10 years back. Have not heard from him since." She waited, but he did not go on. "You do not talk much," she said. He half smiled, the expression barely visible in the darkness. "Talking is fine, but listening is what keeps you alive out here." Clara glanced back at the cabin. Through the window she could see the firelight flickering warm and orange. Her children were sleeping. They were fed. They were alive. For the first time in a long time, she was not waiting for something to go wrong. "Maybe that is true," she said. "But sometimes when you have been quiet too long, the words build up like floodwater. Eventually they find a way out." He looked at her then, really looked, and gave the faintest nod. "You just let me know when you are ready." She did not say anything more, but she stayed sitting beside him until the cold crept too deep into her bones to ignore. 2 more days passed. The snow settled deeper in the hollows and along the eaves, but the sky began to clear. Pale blue stretched thin over the mountains, and the worst of the winter's wrath pulled back like a wolf retreating to its den, waiting, but not striking. Clara worked. That was how she got through. She mended clothes with numb fingers, scrubbed filth from the cabin floor until her knuckles split open, kept moving because standing still meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering was a door she did not want to open. Sam stayed. He did not ask permission. He did not make promises. He just kept showing up each morning, hauling firewood, checking the snare lines, melting snow for water. He fixed the shed door with 3 nails and a scrap of tin. He mended the broken stove leg with a rock wedge and patience. He repaired the fence line, though there was nothing left to keep in. The children took to him faster than Clara did. Thomas followed him like a shadow, trailing behind him everywhere he went, watching everything he did with hungry eyes. When Sam showed him how to set a snare, Thomas listened like it was the most important lesson he had ever received. When Sam let him help chop kindling, the boy worked until his arms shook, desperate to prove himself. Clara watched them from the cabin window, and something tight and aching moved through her chest. Thomas had never had this. A man who paid attention. A man who taught instead of shouted. a man who saw him. Sarah was slower to warm. She watched Sam with careful eyes, tracking his every movement, looking for the cracks that tells the warning signs. She had seen too much to trust easily. But when Sam sat near her one evening and asked what she was writing on her slate, she showed him without pulling away. Even baby William quieted in Sam's arms. The first time Clara saw it, she nearly wept. The baby had been fussing all afternoon, colicky and miserable, and nothing Clara did helped. Then Sam held out his hands, wordless, asking permission with his eyes. She hesitated, then handed William over. Within minutes, the baby was asleep. Sam held him carefully, one large hand supporting the tiny head, his face soft in a way Clara had not seen before. And in his eyes she glimpsed something that looked like grief. Old grief, the kind that never fully healed. One morning Sam came back from checking the trail with a different look on his face. His jaw was tight. His eyes were dark. He stomped the snow from his boots without speaking and hung his coat on the nail by the door. Clara was kneading dough at the table, what little flour they had left stretched with water and prayer. She looked up at him, and something in his expression made her hands go still. "What is it?" He did not answer right away. He walked to the fire, held his hands out to the heat, his back to her. "I need to show you something," he said finally. His voice was low. "Careful. Outside. Just you." Clara wiped her hands on her apron. Her heart was beating too fast, though she did not know why. She looked at Sarah, who was watching with alert eyes. "Watch the little ones," Clara said. "I will be right back." The cold hit her like a wall when she stepped outside. The sky was iron gray, heavy with clouds that promised more snow. Sam was already walking toward the tree line, his long legs eating up the ground. She followed her boots crunching through the crust of ice that had formed overnight. He led her down the trail he had cleared, past the woodshed, past the empty chicken coop, into the forest where the pines grew thick and the shadows pooled like dark water. They walked for what felt like a long time, though it could not have been more than 20 minutes. Clara's breath came hard, her lungs burning from the cold. She did not ask where they were going. Some part of her already knew. They found him in a small ravine about 2 miles from the cabin. Henry Whitmore lay face down in the snow, half buried, one arm stretched out in front of him, like he had been crawling, like he had been trying to get home. Clara stopped at the edge of the ravine and looked down. The world went very quiet, very still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She could see his coat, the good one, now stiff and frozen. His boots, still sturdy, pointed at odd angles. A few yards away, the mule lay on its side, equally frozen, equally dead. And on his outstretched hand, she could see the glint of metal. His wedding ring, the same simple gold band that matched the one she still wore on her own finger. "He was coming back," she whispered. The words were barely audible even to herself. He was trying to come back. Sam stood beside her, close enough to catch her if she fell, but not touching. Not presuming. "Looks like he got turned around in the storm," he said quietly. "Got lost. Kept walking in circles. The mule gave out first. He tried to walk the rest." Clara stared at the body of the man she had married 10 years ago, the man who had promised her the world and given her nothing but bruises and broken dreams, the man who had left her and their children alone in a blizzard. And now, here he was, frozen, dead, 2 miles from home. She waited for the grief to come, waited for the tears, the screaming, the collapse. This was her husband, the father of her children. She was supposed to mourn him. But what rose up inside her was not grief. It was relief. And then hard on its heels, shame. Shame for feeling relieved. Shame for the small secret part of her that was glad he was dead. Glad she would never have to wonder when his fist would find her face again. Glad she would never have to listen to another empty promise. She stood there for a long time, looking down at Henry's frozen body, feeling nothing and everything at once. "What do I do now?" she asked. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, hollow, distant. Sam was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We cannot bury him. Ground is frozen solid. We will wrap him up, put him in the shed. Come spring, we can do it proper." She nodded. It was practical, sensible, the kind of answer Henry never would have given. Later, after they had wrapped Henry's body in canvas and stored it in the coldest corner of the shed, Clara stood in the cabin doorway and looked out at the white expanse of snow. The children did not need to know yet. She would tell them eventually when she found the words, but not today. Today they were warm and fed and safe. That was enough. That was more than enough. That night, after the fire had burned down to coals and the children were asleep in their pile beneath the quilts, Clara sat alone at the table. A single candle flickered before her, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In her hands, she held a small leather notebook she had found in Henry's coat pocket when they retrieved his body. His journal. She had not known he kept one. She opened it with trembling fingers and began to read. The first pages were mundane. Notes about supplies, complaints about the weather, the cramped, messy handwriting she had always hated. But then as she turned the pages, the entries grew darker. September 15th, 1878. Lost $50 at the poker table in Hebron. Crawford loaned me more. He wants 20% interest. No other choice. October 3rd, 1878. Clara asked about the seed money. Told her I already sent the order. Did not tell her I lost it in a card game 3 days ago. October 20th, 1878. Crawford says he can forgive the debt if I give him something in return. The way he looks at Clara makes me sick, but I need more time. Clara's hands were shaking now. The candle flame wavered and jumped. She turned to the last written page. The entry was dated November 1st, 1878, just 6 weeks before Henry left on his final journey. She can never know about the child in Hebron. Annie's child. My child. I have been sending money every month, or I was before Crawford took everything. Now the baby is hungry and I have nothing to send. Clara read the words 3 times, her mind refusing to accept them. A child. In Hebron. Henry's child. With another woman. She closed the journal and sat very still in the darkness. Outside, the wind picked up again, whistling through the gaps in the walls, rattling the window panes. The fire crackled and popped. Clara did not cry. She had no tears left for Henry Whitmore. Instead, she slipped the journal beneath a loose floorboard under the table, hiding it away where no one would find it. Some secrets, she decided, were not meant to be shared. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But as she lay down to sleep that night, her mind kept returning to 2 words in Henry's desperate scrawl: Crawford and debt. She did not know yet what those words would come to mean, but she had a feeling deep in her bones that her troubles were far from over. The storm had passed, but a different kind of darkness was coming, and this time she would have to face it alone. The days passed in slow, hard pieces. February crept in with its bitter winds and iron-gray skies, but the worst of winter's fury had spent itself. Snow still lay thick across the land, but it was the settled kind, now packed and crusted, no longer falling from heavens, that seemed determined to bury them alive. Clara worked. That was how she survived. She mended clothes with fingers that were finally healing, scrubbed the cabin floor until the wood showed pale beneath years of grime, cooked what little they had into meals that stretched further than they should. She kept moving because standing still meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering the journal hidden beneath the floorboards, the words that burned in her mind like brands. Crawford. Debt. A child in Hebron. She had not told Sam about any of it. Some secrets were too heavy to share with a stranger, even a stranger who had saved her life. But Sam was becoming less of a stranger with each passing day. He stayed. That was the remarkable thing. He did not ask permission or make promises. He simply kept showing up each morning before dawn, hauling firewood from the forest, checking the snare lines he had set along the ridge, melting snow for water in the big iron pot. He fixed things that had been broken for years, things Henry had always promised to repair, but never did. The shed door that hung crooked on its hinges, the gap in the cabin wall where wind whistled through, the chicken coop empty now but ready for spring. He worked like a man who had nothing else to do and nowhere else to be, like the work itself was enough. The children took to him in different ways. Thomas followed Sam everywhere, a small shadow in two big boots, watching everything with hungry eyes. The boy had never had this before, a man who paid attention, a man who explained instead of shouted, a man who saw him as something other than a burden. One afternoon, Clara watched from the cabin window as Sam taught Thomas how to split kindling. Sam positioned the boy's hands on the hatchet, adjusted his stance, showed him the angle of the swing. When Thomas brought the blade down and the wood split clean, the look on the boy's face nearly broke Clara's heart. Such simple joy, such desperate need for approval. Thomas had been 6 years old the first time Henry hit him. Clara remembered it with terrible clarity. The sound of flesh striking flesh, the look of shock on her son's face, the way something had died in his eyes that day and never fully returned. Now, watching him learn from Sam, she saw something new growing in that empty place, something that looked almost like hope. Sarah was slower to trust. At 12 years old, she had seen too much of men and their failures. She watched Sam with careful eyes, cataloging his movements, waiting for the mask to slip. When he spoke to her, she answered in single words. When he offered to teach her something, she declined. But Clara noticed that Sarah no longer flinched when Sam entered a room, that she had stopped positioning herself between him and the younger children, that sometimes late in the evening she would sit near the fire while he carved and simply watch her face unreadable, but her body still. One night Sam was working on a small wooden horse, his knife moving in sure strokes, curls of pale wood falling to the floor. Sarah sat across from him, her slate forgotten in her lap. "Who taught you to do that?" she asked. It was the first question she had ever asked him voluntarily. Sam did not look up from his work. "My father. He was a miner, but he carved in the evenings," said it kept his hands busy and his mind quiet. Sarah was silent for a moment. Then she said, "My father never made anything." Sam's knife paused for just a heartbeat. Then he resumed, carving, his voice neutral. "Every man is different." Sarah nodded slowly. She did not say anything more, but she stayed by the fire until the horse was finished. When Sam held it out to her, she hesitated only a moment before taking it. The twins, Emma and Eliza, had accepted Sam with the easy trust of young children. They no longer hid when he entered the cabin. Eliza had even started bringing him small offerings, a pretty stone she found by the creek, a feather from some winter bird treasures laid at his feet like gifts for a king, and baby William. The baby had been the slowest to recover from those terrible days when death had crouched at their door. For weeks he remained listless and weak, his cries thin and reedy, his little body too light in Clara's arms. She had feared the worst, had lain awake night after night listening to his breathing, terrified of the silence that might come. But slowly, gradually, he began to improve. His cheeks filled out, his eyes grew bright. He started reaching for things, grabbing at Clara's hair, at the buttons on her dress, at anything that came within range of his tiny fists. And he had taken to Sam in a way that defied explanation. The first time it happened, Clara was at her wits' end. William had been crying for hours, that high, thin wail that scraped at her nerves and made her want to scream. She had tried everything, feeding, rocking, walking, singing. Nothing worked. Sam had been sitting by the fire mending a harness. Without a word, he set down his work and held out his hands. Clara hesitated. This was her child, her responsibility. But she was so tired, so worn down. She handed William over. Within minutes, the crying stopped. The baby blinked up at Sam with wide eyes, then made a small cooing sound and fell asleep against his chest. Clara stared at them. At her son, peaceful for the first time in hours. At this stranger who had somehow become the center of their small world. "How did you do that?" she asked. Sam did not answer for a long moment. His eyes were distant, fixed on something Clara could not see. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "I have held a baby before." He said nothing more, but Clara saw the shadow that crossed his face, the tightening of his jaw, the way his arms held William just a little closer than necessary. There was a story there, a painful one. She could see it in every line of his body. She did not ask, not yet. Some wounds needed time before they could bear the weight of words. Instead, she simply said, "Thank you." Sam nodded once, his eyes still on the sleeping child in his arms. They sat in silence as the fire crackled, as the wind howled outside, as the night deepened around them. And though neither of them spoke, something had shifted between them. A wall had cracked, just a little, just enough to let a sliver of light through. The third week of February brought a visitor. Clara was kneading bread dough when she heard the horse approaching. Her hands went still. Her heart began to pound. No one had come to their cabin since Sam arrived. No one even knew they were still alive. Sam was outside chopping wood. She heard the rhythm of his axe pause, then stop entirely. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door. A man sat on a gray mare in the yard, his breath misting in the cold air. He was old, his beard white as the snow around him, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of a battered hat. He looked at Sam for a long moment, then let out a low whistle. Samuel Brennan. The old man's voice was gravely worn by years and tobacco. "I thought you were dead." Sam lowered the axe slowly. His face had gone carefully blank. "Pete Hansen." The old man dismounted with the stiffness of age and walked toward Sam. Clara watched from the doorway, her instincts screaming at her to grab the children and hide. "You know this place?" Pete asked, gesturing at the cabin with a gnarled hand. "I know the woman who lives here needed help." Pete's eyes moved to Clara, took in her thin frame, her worn dress, the flour on her hands. His gaze was assessing but not unkind. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat, "name's Pete Hansen. Knew Sam's daddy back in the day. Worked the mines together before Patrick passed." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Pete turned back to Sam. "We need to talk, private-like." Sam glanced at Clara, something flickering in his eyes. Then he nodded and walked with Pete toward the woodshed, away from the cabin. Clara stood in the doorway and watched them go. She could not hear their words, but she could see their bodies. The way Sam went rigid when Pete said something, the way his hands clenched at his sides, the way he turned and walked toward the forest without looking back. He did not return for hours. When he finally came back, the sun was setting and the children were already eating their supper. Clara had saved a plate for him by the fire. He sat down heavily and ate in silence, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on nothing. "What did he tell you?" Clara asked finally. Sam set down his plate. He did not look at her. "Told me some things I did not want to hear." "About what?" "About who I used to be." The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Clara waited, giving him space to speak or not speak as he chose. Finally, Sam looked up. His eyes were dark with something that might have been shame. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and you might not want me here after you hear it." Clara's stomach clenched, but she kept her face calm. "Tell me." Sam took a deep breath. "After my wife and daughter died, I lost myself for a while, went down a dark road, became a bounty hunter, tracked men who had prices on their heads, brought them in for the reward money." Clara listened, her hands folded in her lap. "Most of them I brought in alive," Sam continued, "but there were two men in Wyoming. They had killed a family, woman and her children, burned the house down around them." His voice cracked slightly. "I found them, and I killed them." Clara did not move, did not speak. The law said it was justified. Self-defense and killing wanted criminals. They let me go. But I knew the truth. Sam's eyes met hers, and in them she saw the weight of years of self-hatred. I wanted to kill them. I went looking for them, hoping they would give me an excuse. And when they did, I pulled the trigger without hesitation. That makes me a killer no matter what any judge says. The fire crackled. Outside, wind rattled the window. Clara thought about Henry, about the nights she had lain awake imagining him dead, about the relief she had felt when she saw his frozen body in that ravine. Was she so different from this man who sat before her confessing his sins like she was a priest? She thought about the children asleep in the next room, about Thomas who had finally started to smile again, about Sarah who was learning to trust, about baby William who slept peacefully only in Sam's arms. And she thought about herself, about the woman she had been before Henry, about the woman she had become after 10 years of marriage to a man who broke every promise he made, about the woman she might still become if she had the courage to try. "Who did they kill?" she asked quietly. "The men you went after." Sam blinked. It was clearly not the question he had expected. "A widow," he said, "and her 3 children. Youngest was maybe 6 years old. And they were wanted criminals, men who had killed before." "Yes." Clara nodded slowly. "Then it seems to me the world is better off without them." Sam stared at her like she had spoken in a foreign language. "I have lived with a man who hurt me for 10 years, Clara said. "I have lain awake at night wishing he was dead. When I found his body in that ravine, the first thing I felt was relief." She met his eyes squarely. "Does that make me a monster?" "That is different. You never actually hurt anyone." Clara shook her head. "Maybe not with my hands, but I thought about it. God knows I thought about it." She leaned forward slightly. "We have all done things we are not proud of, Sam. We have all got darkness inside us. The question is not whether we have it. The question is what we do with it." Sam was silent for a long time. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across his face. "Why are you not afraid of me?" he asked finally. Clara considered the question. "Because a man who saves a stranger's children from freezing to death is not the same man who killed outlaws 5 years ago. People change. Circumstances change." She paused. "And because I have spent too much of my life being afraid. I am tired of it." Something shifted in Sam's expression. The rigid set of his shoulders eased slightly. The darkness in his eyes softened. "You are a remarkable woman, Clara Whitmore." Clara almost smiled. "I am a desperate woman who does not have the luxury of being particular. Now finish your supper before it gets cold." He picked up his plate and began to eat. The silence between them was different now, easier, like a door had opened that could never quite be closed again. But even as Clara watched him eat, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning. Pete Hansen had ridden a long way to tell Sam those things, and Sam had disappeared into the forest for hours afterward. There was more to this story, more that Sam had not told her, and Clara had a feeling that whatever it was going to find them sooner or later. March came in like a lion with winds that howled down from the mountains and temperatures that plunged below zero. But beneath the snow, Clara could feel the first stirrings of change. The days were growing longer. The ice on the creek was starting to thin. Spring was coming whether they were ready for it or not. Sam had not left. After that night by the fire, something had settled between them. Not quite trust, not quite friendship, but something in between. They worked together now in easy rhythm, their movements coordinated without need for words. He chopped wood while she cooked. She mended clothes while he repaired tools. They shared meals and silences and the small moments that made up a life. The children had stopped calling him Mr. Brennan. Thomas called him Sam now, or sometimes just Sir. The twins called him Mr. Sam, which made his mouth twitch in what might have been a smile. Sarah still did not call him anything, but she had stopped watching him with suspicious eyes, and baby William reached for him whenever he entered the room. They had become something like a family, Clara realized one evening as she watched them all gathered around the fire. Not a real family, not bound by blood or law, but something close, something that felt almost like belonging. It could not last. She knew that. Sam had his own life, his own path. He would leave eventually when the snow melted and the roads opened. He would ride away and never look back, and she would be alone again with 5 children and a dead husband's debts. She did not let herself think about how much that thought hurt. On the 7th of March, everything changed. Clara was outside hanging laundry on the line she had rigged between 2 trees when she heard the jingle of harness bells. She straightened her hands, still gripping a wet shirt, and watched as a fine black carriage crested the ridge and rolled down the trail toward the cabin. Her heart went cold. No one drove a carriage like that in this territory except men with money and power. Men who wanted things. Sam emerged from the woodshed, axe in hand. His eyes found the carriage and narrowed. "Get inside," he said quietly. "Take the children into the back room. Who is it? Just do it, please." Clara did not argue. She gathered her skirts and ran for the cabin, calling for Sarah to help her with the little ones. By the time she had herded them all into the small back room, she could hear voices outside. Male voices. One she did not recognize, smooth and oily, and Sam's flat and hard. She crept to the window and peered through a crack in the shutter. 3 men stood in the yard. 2 were rough-looking types, hired muscle by the look of them, hands resting on pistols at their hips. The third was different. He was tall and lean, dressed in a fine black coat and polished boots that had never seen a day's honest work. His hair was silver at the temples, his face handsome in a cold, calculating way. He was smiling, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore," he called, looking past Sam toward the cabin. "I know you are in there. My name is Silas Crawford. I believe your late husband and I had some business to discuss." Clara's blood turned to ice. Crawford, the name from Henry's journal. She pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. "She is not seeing visitors," Sam said. His voice was steady, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. Crawford's smile widened. "Mr. Brennan, is it I have heard of you? The bounty hunter who found religion? How touching." He took a step forward. "But this is not your affair. I have business with the widow. Legal business. Whatever business you have, you can discuss it with me." Crawford laughed a cold sound that made Clara's skin crawl. "Very well, since you insist." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. "Your late husband borrowed money from me last fall. $200 for seed, another $50 for supplies. With interest, the total debt now stands at $312. He let that number hang in the air for a moment. "The property is collateral. Payment is due on the 15th of March. That is 8 days from now." Clara's knees went weak. $312. They did not have $3. They barely had food to last the week. "The widow does not have that kind of money," Sam said. "I know." Crawford's smile turned predatory. "Which is why I have come to offer her an alternative." He looked past Sam again, directly at the window where Clara was hiding. She knew he could not see her through the shutter, but it felt like his eyes found hers anyway. "I am a widower myself," Crawford continued. "I need a wife to manage my household, raise my children. Mrs. Whitmore is young, strong, reasonably attractive. I am prepared to forgive the debt entirely in exchange for her hand in marriage." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Marriage. To this man with his cold eyes and colder smile. To escape one prison only to enter another. "She is not for sale," Sam said. His voice had gone very quiet. "Very dangerous." "Everything is for sale, Mr. Brennan. It is simply a matter of price." Crawford folded the paper and tucked it back into his coat. "I will give her 8 days to consider my offer. After that, I will take what is owed to me one way or another." He turned and walked back to his carriage, his hired men falling in behind him. At the door he paused and looked back. "Oh, and Mr. Brennan, I would advise you to stay out of matters that do not concern you. I am a patient man, but my patience has limits." He climbed into the carriage and shut the door. The driver cracked his whip and the horses began to move. Within minutes the carriage had disappeared over the ridge, leaving only the tracks of its wheels in the snow. Sam stood very still in the yard, his axe still in his hand, his eyes fixed on the place where the carriage had vanished. Clara opened the door and stepped outside. Her legs were shaking, but she forced herself to walk steadily to keep her voice calm. "How much did you hear?" Sam asked without turning around. "All of it." He nodded slowly. "We need to talk." They sat at the table that night after the children were asleep, a single candle burning between them. Clara's hands were folded in her lap. Sam's were flat on the table, palms down, like he was trying to anchor himself to something solid. "I will not marry him," Clara said. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I do not care what he threatens. I know. So what do we do?" Sam was silent for a moment. Then he said, "My father left me something. A mining claim up at Coulter's Ridge. Silver vein. He never worked it much, just enough to get by. Said it was insurance. Something to fall back on if times got bad enough." Clara looked at him. "You are saying there might be enough silver there to pay off the debt?" "Maybe. I do not know for certain. I have not been there in years. but the vein was rich when my father found it. Could be there is still something left. Coulter's Ridge is 3 days' ride from here. I know. You could get yourself killed. The mountains in March are deadly. I know that too. Sam met her eyes. But I do not see another way. Do you? Clara thought about it. Thought about the alternatives. Selling the land if anyone would buy it. Going to work in Hebron if anyone would hire a widow with 5 children. Marrying Crawford. No, there was no other way. When would you leave tomorrow? First light. The sooner I go, the sooner I can get back. Clara nodded slowly. The candle flame flickered between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Why are you doing this? She asked. You do not owe us anything. You could ride away tonight and never look back. No one would blame you. Sam was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was rough. When my wife and daughter died, I wanted to die too. Spent years trying to find a way to do it that did not feel like giving up. Hunting bounties was part of that. I did not care if I lived or died, so I took the dangerous jobs, went after the worst men. Figured eventually one of them would kill me and save me the trouble. He paused, his eyes distant. Then I came through this valley. Saw your cabin. Saw the smoke stop coming from the chimney. And something in me woke up. Something that had been sleeping for a long time. He looked at her. You gave me a reason to care whether I lived or died. Your children gave me something to protect again. That is worth more than you know. Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back. What if you do not come back? I will come back. You cannot promise that. No. He reached across the table and took her hand. His fingers were rough and warm. But I can promise I will try. That has to be enough. She looked down at their joined hands, his scarred and calloused, hers raw and reddened from work, 2 hands that had known hardship, 2 hands that had learned to keep going despite everything. Then try, she said, and come back to us. He left at dawn. Clara stood in the doorway and watched him saddle his horse in the gray half-light, watched him tie his pack behind the saddle, watched him check his rifle and his supplies. The children were still asleep. She had not woken them to say goodbye. It seemed easier that way. Sam finished his preparations and walked toward her. His breath misted in the cold air. His eyes were steady. 8 days, he said. Maybe less if the weather holds. Clara nodded. She did not trust herself to speak. He reached into his coat and withdrew something small. A carved wooden bird, no bigger than her thumb, delicate and perfect. I was making this for William. He pressed it into her hand. Hold on to it for me. Give it to him when he is old enough to appreciate it. Clara's fingers closed around the bird. The wood was smooth and warm from being pressed against his chest. Sam, she said. Her voice broke on his name. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead. Just a brush of lips against skin. Gentle, chaste, but it burned like a brand. I will come back, he said again. I promise. And then he was mounting his horse, and the horse was moving, and he was riding away up the trail toward the ridge, his shape growing smaller and smaller against the white expanse of snow, until finally he disappeared into the trees. Clara stood in the doorway for a long time after he was gone, the wooden bird clutched in her hand, the taste of goodbye bitter on her tongue. 8 days. She began to count. The first 3 days passed slowly. Clara kept busy. There was always work to do on a homestead, even one as poor as theirs. She cooked and cleaned and mended. She melted snow for water. She rationed their dwindling supplies with the care of a miser counting coins. But no matter how busy she kept her hands, her mind would not be still. It kept circling back to Sam, riding alone through the mountains, facing dangers she could not imagine. It kept circling back to Crawford, waiting in his fine house in Helena, counting down the days until he could claim her. It kept circling back to the journal hidden beneath the floorboards, to Henry's secrets still festering in the dark. On the 4th day, Clara made a decision. She was done hiding from the truth. If Crawford was coming for her, she needed to understand exactly what she was facing, and that meant understanding exactly what Henry had done. That night, after the children were asleep, she took the journal from its hiding place and began to read from the beginning. What she found turned her stomach. Henry had been in debt long before they came to Montana. He had borrowed money from half a dozen men across 3 states, always promising to pay it back, always finding excuses when the time came. He had gambled away their savings, their seed money, their future. He had lied to her face again and again and again. And Crawford. Henry had first met Crawford 2 years ago at a saloon in Hebron. Crawford had recognized him immediately as a mark, a weak man with expensive habits and no self-control. He had extended credit freely, waiting patiently, while the debt mounted higher and higher. The journal made it clear that Crawford had always intended to take the land. The debt was just a pretext. He had been planning this for years. But the worst was yet to come. Clara turned to the final pages, the entries from the weeks before Henry's death, and found a name that made her blood run cold. Annie Shaw, a woman in Hebron, a barmaid at the saloon where Henry spent his evenings. Young, pretty, desperate. Henry had been keeping her for over a year, paying for her room, buying her things, visiting her when he claimed to be on business in town. And she had borne him a child, a little girl. Rose Henry had called her, 2 years old now. Clara stared at the words until they blurred. A daughter. Henry had a daughter with another woman, a child she had never known existed. She closed the journal and sat very still in the darkness. The fire had burned down to embers. The wind moaned outside like something in pain. She thought about the child in Hebron. Rose. A little girl with no father now. A little girl who might be hungry, might be cold, might be wondering why the man who used to visit had stopped coming. She thought about her own children asleep in the next room. 5 lives depending on her, 5 futures hanging in the balance. And she thought about Sam somewhere in the mountains risking his life for a woman he barely knew and children who were not his own. When dawn came, Clara knew what she had to do. She was done running from the past, done hiding from the truth. When Sam came back, she would tell him everything. About the journal, about Crawford, about the child in Hebron, and then together they would figure out what to do next. The 7th day came with no sign of Sam. Clara stood at the window watching the trail, her heart heavy with fear. The weather had turned foul again, a late winter storm blowing in from the west, dumping fresh snow on the mountains. If Sam was caught in that storm, if he had been injured or lost or worse, she could not think about that, would not think about it. Thomas had stopped talking. He spent his days staring out the window waiting for a rider who did not come. Sarah had taken over most of the household chores, her face set in grim lines that made her look far older than 12. The twins were fretful and clingy, sensing the tension without understanding it. And baby William cried more than usual, reaching for arms that were not there. On the morning of the 8th day, no rider appeared on the ridge. Clara stood at the window until her legs ached, watching the empty trail willing a shape to emerge from the tree line. Nothing came. The sun climbed higher. The hours crawled past, and still nothing. By midday she knew. Sam was not coming. Something had happened in those mountains. He was dead or dying or lost in the snow. Either way, he was gone, and she was alone. At 2 o'clock a rider appeared, but it was not Sam. It was one of Crawford's men come to escort her to Helena. "The choice has been made for you, Mrs. Whitmore," the man said, his smile thin and cruel. "Mr. Crawford expects you at the church by sundown. Wear something nice." Clara looked at her children gathered around her with frightened eyes. She looked at the empty trail where Sam should have appeared. She looked at the rifle hanging above the door, loaded and ready. And then she made her decision. She would go to Helena, she would stand in that church. But she would not marry Silas Crawford. She would buy time, she would stall, she would do whatever it took to give Sam one more hour, one more chance to return. And if he did not come, she would find another way. She had survived too much to give up now. The church in Helena was small and plain, with whitewashed walls and a wooden cross above the altar. Clara stood at the front wearing the only dress she owned that was not patched or stained, her hands clasped before her, her heart pounding in her chest. Crawford stood beside her, his smile wide and triumphant. His men lined the back of the church hands on their pistols, ensuring no one would interfere. The preacher, a nervous young man with sweat on his brow, read from his Bible with a trembling voice. "If any person can show just cause why these two should not be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." Silence filled the church. Clara closed her eyes and prayed. Please, please let him come. The preacher cleared his throat. Very well, then let us proceed. He turned to Crawford. Do you, Silas Crawford, take this woman to be your— The church doors burst open. A figure stood silhouetted against the afternoon light. Tall, broad-shouldered, one arm bandaged and hanging at his side. I have just cause, Sam Brennan said, his voice ringing through the silence. He walked down the aisle, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. In his good hand he held a leather pouch. Behind him 2 men followed, one of them wearing a badge. This woman owes me nothing, Sam said, stopping before the altar. Her husband's debt was paid in full this morning. He turned to the man with the badge. Sheriff, I believe you have some questions for Mr. Crawford about his lending practices. Crawford's face went purple with rage. This is outrageous. This is— The sheriff stepped forward. Mr. Crawford, we have received complaints about fraudulent loans and coerced marriages. I think you had better come with me. Clara watched as Crawford was led away, sputtering and threatening. She watched as the church emptied the townspeople, whispering and staring. And then she turned to Sam, who stood before her, with exhaustion in his eyes and hope on his face. You came, she whispered. I promised, he said. And then she was in his arms, and nothing else mattered. The fire crackled and popped, casting warm shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the last light of day was fading into purple darkness, but inside there was warmth. There was safety. There was Sam sitting propped against the wall, his wounded arm cleaned and bandaged, a cup of hot coffee in his good hand. Clara sat across from him, the children finally asleep in the back room after hours of excitement and questions. The leather pouch of silver sat on the table between them, heavy with promise. Tell me, Clara said quietly. Tell me what happened in the mountains. Sam stared into his coffee for a long moment, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice was rough with exhaustion and something else, something that sounded like grief. I reached Coulter's Ridge on the 3rd day. The trail was harder than I remembered, half buried in snow, but I found the old markers my father left. The mine entrance was just where I remembered it, hidden behind a stand of pines. He paused, taking a slow sip of coffee. But when I got close, I saw smoke. Someone had set up camp near the mine. A rough shelter, a fire pit, horses tied to a picket line. I thought maybe it was claim jumpers. Happens sometimes when word gets out about a silver vein. Clara listened without interrupting, her hands folded in her lap. I waited until dark, then crept closer to get a look at who I was dealing with. There were 3 men around the fire. 2 of them were young, rough-looking, the kind you see in every frontier town, looking for easy money and not particular about how they get it. Sam's voice dropped lower, but the 3rd man was older. He was sitting with his back to me, but there was something about the way he held himself, the set of his shoulders, the way he tilted his head when he listened. I knew that silhouette. I had grown up watching it across 1,000 campfires. Clara felt her breath catch. Your brother. Sam nodded slowly. Jacob. My brother Jacob, who I thought died in a mining accident in California 10 years ago. Who I mourned. Who I named my daughter after, in a way. Lily was my mother's name, but her middle name was Jacqueline. For Jacob. He set down his coffee cup, his hand trembling slightly. I stepped out of the shadows and called his name. The 2 young men went for their guns, but Jacob stopped them. He turned around and looked at me and Clara. I swear it was like looking into a mirror that showed me what I might have become if I had made different choices. What do you mean? Sam was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Jacob did not die in that mining accident. He was buried alive when a tunnel collapsed, trapped under rock and timber for 3 days before anyone dug him out. When they finally reached him, he had lost his memory, did not know his own name, did not know where he came from, did not know he had a brother back in Montana who was waiting for word that never came. Clara's heart ached at the pain in Sam's voice. He spent years wandering, trying to figure out who he was, took whatever work he could find, fell in with bad company, did things he was not proud of. By the time his memory started coming back bit by bit, he had become someone else entirely. A man who lived outside the law. A man who took what he wanted and did not ask permission. Sam looked up at Clara, his eyes haunted. He came back to Montana, looking for the mine. Our father's mine. He figured it was his birthright, same as mine. He did not know I was still alive, did not know I had been mourning him all these years. What happened when he saw you? Sam let out a long breath, his eyes distant with memory. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We just stood there staring at each other across 10 years of silence and grief. Then his men went for their guns. Jacob stopped them with a word, but the tension did not break. One of his men, a young one with cold eyes, kept his hand on his pistol. "Who is this?" the young one demanded. "My brother Jacob," said. "The one I told you was dead." "Then maybe he should be dead," the young one said. "He has seen our faces. He knows where the mine is." Clara felt her blood chill at Sam's words. Jacob looked at me. Sam continued, and I saw the decision forming in his eyes. He was calculating, weighing, trying to decide if I was worth the risk. So I made the choice easy for him. "What did you do?" I told him about you, about the children, about the debt and Crawford and the 8 days I had to save you. I told him I had not come for the silver. I had come because a woman and her children were going to lose everything, and I had promised to help them. Sam's voice cracked slightly, and I told him about Margaret and Lily, about how I lost them, about how finding you and the children had given me something to live for again. Clara squeezed his hand. Jacob listened. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he walked to his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch. "This is what our father left us," he said. "I have been mining it for months. There is more than enough for both of us." He held it out to me, but his men did not like that. The young one with the cold eyes drew his gun. "We did not risk our necks for you to give it away," the young one said. "That silver is ours." Jacob did not move, did not flinch. He just looked at the young man with eyes that had seen too much. "This is my brother," Jacob said. "This is family." "Family means nothing out here." "It means everything," Jacob said. "It is all we have." Sam paused, his jaw tight. "What happened?" Clara asked. "The young one made a choice. He raised his gun toward me, and Jacob shot him." Clara gasped. "Not to kill," Sam said quickly. "In the shoulder. Enough to drop him, not enough to end him. But it sent a message." The other man backed down, and Jacob turned to me with blood on his hands and grief in his eyes. "Take the silver," he said. "Build something good with it, something I never could." That is when I understood. Jacob was not giving me silver. He was giving me a chance to do what he never had, to choose family over survival, to be the man our father raised us to be. Sam met Clara's eyes. "I made him a promise, Clara. I told him I would use this silver to build something worth building. A home, a family, a life." He paused. "I intend to keep that promise." They sat in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling, the wind whispering outside. Then Clara squeezed his hand and said, "We should get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." Sam nodded, but there was one more thing he needed to say. "Clara, whatever happens with Crawford tomorrow, I want you to know something." She waited. "I did not come back just to pay off a debt. I came back because this is where I belong now, with you, with the children." He met her eyes. "If you will have me." Clara felt something break open inside her, something she had kept locked away for so long she had forgotten it was there. "Ask me again," she said softly, "when this is over. Ask me again, and I will give you my answer." Sam nodded once, a small smile touching his lips. "That is enough for now." The morning dawned clear and cold, the sky a pale washed blue, the snow glittering like diamonds under the early sun. Clara stood on the porch and breathed in the crisp air, feeling more alive than she had in years. Sam was already in the yard saddling his horse with his one good arm, his movements slow but determined. The silver was packed securely in his saddlebags. Today they would ride to Helena and pay off Crawford. Today they would buy their freedom. Clara had made arrangements with a neighbor woman who lived 3 miles down the valley, a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who had agreed to watch the children for the day. It was not ideal leaving them with a near stranger, but Clara could not bring them to Helena. Not for this. The ride to town took most of the morning. Clara sat behind Sam on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back. They did not speak much. There was too much to say, and not enough words to say it. Helena was a bustling town full of miners and merchants and men in expensive suits. Crawford's office was on the main street, a two-story building with his name painted in gold letters on the window. Clara felt her stomach clench as they approached. They dismounted and tied the horse to the hitching post. Sam reached into his saddlebag and pulled out the leather pouch. "Ready?" he asked. Clara nodded. "Let us end this." They pushed through the door and into a reception area. A young clerk looked up from his desk, his eyes widening as he took in their trail-worn appearance. "We are here to see Mr. Crawford," Sam said. "Tell him Clara Whitmore is here to settle her account." The clerk hurried away. A moment later he returned and ushered them into Crawford's private office. The man himself sat behind a massive mahogany desk, a cigar smoldering in an ashtray beside him. He looked up as they entered, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Mrs. Whitmore, how delightful! I was not expecting you until sundown." He glanced at Sam, his smile sharpening. "And you brought your guard dog. How touching." "We are not here for pleasantries," Clara said. Her voice was steady, even though her heart was pounding. "We are here to pay my husband's debt." Crawford's eyebrows rose. "Indeed." He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "And where, pray tell, did a penniless widow come by $312? That is not your concern." Sam stepped forward and dropped the leather pouch on Crawford's desk. It landed with a heavy thunk. "Count it. You will find it is all there, plus interest." Crawford's eyes flickered to the pouch, then back to Sam. His smile did not waver, but something cold moved behind his eyes. "How industrious of you." He reached for the pouch and began to count the silver coins, his movements slow and deliberate. After a long moment, he nodded. "It appears to be in order. Then we are done here." Clara held out her hand. "I want the deed to my land and a receipt showing the debt is paid in full." Crawford did not move. "Not so fast, Mrs. Whitmore." He set down the coins and folded his hands on the desk. "You see, there is the matter of the original agreement your husband signed." "What about it?" Crawford's smile turned predatory. "The terms state that if the debt is not paid by the deadline, the property transfers to me automatically." He glanced at the clock on his wall. "And according to my records, the deadline was yesterday at midnight." Clara's blood ran cold. "That is a lie. Your man said sundown today. My man was mistaken." Crawford spread his hands in mock apology. "I am afraid the property is already mine, legally speaking." Sam took a step forward, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. Crawford held up a finger. "I would not do that if I were you, Mr. Brennan. There are 2 armed men in the next room who have been instructed to shoot you both if I give the signal." He smiled pleasantly. "Now let us discuss this like civilized people." Clara felt the world tilting beneath her feet. After everything, after the silver and the journey and the hope it was going to end like this. Crawford had outmaneuvered them. He had won. But Sam did not seem surprised. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "Before you get too comfortable, Crawford, you might want to take a look at this." Crawford's smile faltered slightly. "What is that?" "A copy of the original loan agreement your husband signed." Sam unfolded the paper and laid it on the desk. "Notice the date, notice the terms, and notice that the deadline is clearly stated as March 15th, 1879, not March 14th. March 15th. Crawford's face went pale. "I had a lawyer in Butte look it over," Sam continued. "He confirmed that the deadline is today, not yesterday, which means our payment is on time, which means the property still belongs to Mrs. Whitmore." Crawford snatched up the paper, his eyes scanning it frantically. His jaw clenched, his hands trembled. "This is a forgery. Feel free to have your own lawyer examine it." Sam's voice was calm. "I am sure the court will be very interested in how you tried to steal a widow's land through fraud." For a long moment, no one moved. Clara could hear her own heartbeat loud in her ears. She could see the rage building behind Crawford's eyes, the calculation, the barely restrained violence. Then Crawford let out a slow breath and set down the paper. "Very well." He opened a drawer and pulled out a sheaf of documents. "It appears I was mistaken about the date." He signed several papers with quick, angry strokes and thrust them across the desk. "Here is your deed. Here is your receipt. The debt is paid. We are finished." Clara took the papers with trembling hands. She wanted to say something cutting, something that would wound him as deeply as he had tried to wound her. But nothing came. In the end, she simply turned and walked out the door, Sam close behind her. They did not speak until they were back on the horse riding out of town at a brisk trot. Then Clara let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. "How did you know about the date?" Sam glanced back at her. "I did not, but I figured Crawford was the type to try something underhanded. So I took a gamble. That paper was fake." Sam almost smiled. "Let us just say I am glad he did not look too closely." Clara stared at him for a moment, then began to laugh. It was a wild, slightly hysterical sound, born of relief and exhaustion and the giddy realization that they had won. They had actually won. The weeks that followed were the happiest Clara had known since she was a girl. Spring came slowly to the high country, creeping in on warming winds and lengthening days. The snow melted, revealing the brown grass beneath. Green shoots pushed up through the thawing earth. Birds returned to the trees, filling the air with song. And Sam stayed. He had not asked her again about marriage, not in so many words. But he did not need to. The answer was in every look they shared, every accidental touch, every quiet evening spent side by side before the fire. They were building something together, something strong, something real. The children flourished. Thomas grew taller and stronger, his confidence blooming under Sam's patient guidance. Sarah began to smile more, her wary eyes softening into something almost like trust. The twins ran wild through the greening fields, their laughter ringing out like bells, and baby William took his first steps toddling across the cabin floor into Sam's waiting arms. In late April they planted the garden. Clara worked alongside Sam, turning the earth-sowing seeds, building something that would grow and bear fruit. It felt like a promise, a new beginning. That night, after the children were asleep, Sam found Clara standing on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "I have been thinking," he said quietly. "About what?" "About us. About what we are building here." He turned her to face him, his eyes serious in the moonlight. "I know we have not spoken of it directly, but I need you to know, Clara, I am not going anywhere. This is my home now. You are my home." Clara looked up at him, at this man who had saved her life and her children's lives, who had fought for them and bled for them and stayed when he had every reason to leave. "I know," she said softly. "I have known for a while." "Then let me say it plainly." Sam took her hands in his. "I love you, Clara Whitmore. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, as your husband, as a father to your children, as whatever you will let me be." Clara felt tears well up in her eyes, happy tears, the kind she had not cried in years. "Yes," she whispered, "yes to all of it." He kissed her then, not on the forehead as he had done before, but on the lips, soft and sweet and full of promise. And later, in the quiet darkness of her room with the children sleeping soundly in the back, Clara discovered what it meant to be loved by a man who asked nothing and gave everything. It was nothing like what she had known with Henry. There was no taking, no demanding, no pain, only gentleness, only patience, only the slow, careful building of something sacred. Afterward she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "We should marry," Sam said quietly. "Make it official." Clara smiled against his skin. "Is that a proposal?" "It is if you want it to be." She lifted her head and looked at him. "Then yes, but let us wait until spring is fully here, until the world has come back to life." Sam nodded and kissed her forehead. "Spring it is." One evening, a few weeks later, as the sun set behind the mountains, Sam took Clara's hand and led her to the porch. They sat together on the old bench, watching the sky turn orange and pink and purple. "There is something I want to talk to you about," Sam said quietly. Clara turned to look at him. "What is it?" "Your husband's journal. About the things you read there." Clara tensed. She had told him everything after Crawford's defeat, about Henry's debts, about his betrayals, about the child in Hebron. What about it? Sam was quiet for a moment. That little girl, Rose, she did not choose her father. She did not choose to be born into this mess. I know. I was thinking maybe we should find her, make sure she is being cared for, and if she is not—" He paused. "If she is not, maybe we could help." Clara turned to look at him, her heart swelling. "You would do that?" "Taken my dead husband's illegitimate child." "She is just a child, Clara. She is innocent in all this. And besides," Sam met her eyes, "it seems to me that family is not just about blood, it is about choice, about love, about showing up for each other when it matters." Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks. She did not try to stop them. "When this baby comes," she said, placing a hand on her belly, "she is going to have a good father, whether she shares your blood or not." Sam's eyes widened. Baby Clara smiled through her tears. "I was going to tell you tonight, I am carrying your child, Sam. Our child." For a moment Sam just stared at her. Then his face transformed, breaking open into something she had never seen before. Joy. Pure, unguarded joy. He pulled her into his arms and held her close, his face buried in her hair. "A child," he whispered. "Our child." They held each other as the sun finished its descent, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, as the world around them settled into the peaceful quiet of evening. The next morning they hitched up the wagon and drove to Hebron. The town was small and dusty, a single main street lined with shops and saloons. Clara felt eyes on her as they passed curious stares from people who probably remembered Henry Whitmore and his drinking and his gambling. Let them look. She had nothing to be ashamed of. They found Annie Shaw in a boarding house on the edge of town. She was younger than Clara had expected, barely 20, with tired eyes and work-roughened hands. When Clara explained who she was and why she had come, Annie's face crumpled. "I did not know what to do," Annie said, her voice breaking. "After Henry stopped coming, stopped sending money, I did not know how to take care of her. I am barely taking care of myself." "Where is she?" Clara asked gently. "Where is Rose?" Annie led them to a small room at the back of the boarding house. And there, sitting on a narrow bed, clutching a rag doll to her chest, was a little girl with Henry's dark hair and Henry's blue eyes. She looked up as they entered, her face wary and watchful in a way that broke Clara's heart. "Rose," Annie said softly, "these people want to meet you." Clara knelt down so she was at eye level with the child. "Hello, Rose. My name is Clara. I knew your father." Rose did not speak, just watched with those big, solemn eyes. "I have 5 children at home," Clara continued. "They would love to meet you. We have a big cabin and a garden and lots of room to play." She paused. "Would you like to come and stay with us for a while?" Rose looked at Annie, then back at Clara. Her small voice was barely a whisper. Forever, Clara felt her heart crack wide open. "Forever," she said. "If you want." Rose considered this for a long moment. Then she held out her hand, the one not clutching the rag doll, and placed it in Clara's. "Okay," she said simply. And just like that, their family grew by one. Summer came in a blaze of green and gold. The garden flourished. The chickens that Sam had bought in town laid eggs every day. The cow gave milk. The children ran and played and laughed, their voices carrying across the valley like music. Clara grew round with child, her belly swelling as the weeks passed. Sam watched over her with fierce protectiveness, refusing to let her lift anything heavy, insisting she rest during the hottest part of the day. Rose settled into their family like she had always been there. She was quiet at first, watchful and cautious, but the other children drew her out. Thomas taught her to fish in the creek. Sarah brushed her hair and told her stories. The twins adopted her as their new best friend, and baby William toddled after her everywhere, babbling happily. One afternoon in late July, Clara was sitting on the porch shelling peas when a wagon appeared on the road. Her heart clenched, old instincts flaring, but as the wagon drew closer, she recognized the driver. Ruth Whitmore, Henry's sister. Clara set down the peas and stood, one hand resting on her swollen belly. She had not seen Ruth since the funeral they had held for Henry in the spring, a small, quiet affair attended by no one but family. Ruth climbed down from the wagon and stood in the yard, her face uncertain. She looked older than Clara remembered. Tired, humbled. Clara, Ruth said. I hope I am not intruding. You are not. Ruth twisted her hands together. I came to apologize. For last winter. For not coming when you needed help. For all the things I said and thought and did not say. Clara studied her sister-in-law. She remembered the judgment in Ruth's eyes when she first married Henry, the disapproval when they left for Montana, the silence when Clara sent letters begging for help. Why now? Clara asked. Because I was wrong. Ruth's voice cracked. I thought I was better than you. Thought I had life figured out. But then my own husband left me and I realized I was not better at all. I was just luckier. Until I was not. Clara felt something soften inside her. Come inside, she said. I will make tea. They sat at the kitchen table, two women who had been sisters-in-law for a decade but had never really been sisters. Clara poured tea and listened as Ruth talked, about her husband's abandonment, about the shame she felt, about the way the town had turned against her the same way they had turned against Clara years ago. I understand now, Ruth said finally, what you went through, how hard it was. I am so sorry I was not there for you. Clara reached across the table and took Ruth's hand. We cannot change the past, she said, but we can choose what we do next. She paused. Stay for dinner. Meet my family. See what we have built here. Ruth looked around the cabin, at the children playing in the yard, at Sam, who had just come in from the field, his face curious, at the warmth and life that filled every corner. I would like that, Ruth said quietly. I would like that very much. The baby came on a crisp September morning as the leaves were just beginning to turn. Clara labored through the night with Sam pacing in the yard and the children huddled together in the back room, waiting. Mrs. Patterson had come to help, and between her steady hands and Clara's determination, the birth went smoothly. As the sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Clara held her daughter for the first time. She was perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, a cap of dark hair, and eyes that would later prove to be the same gray-blue as Sam's. They named her Hope. Sam came in to meet his daughter, and Clara watched as he took the tiny bundle in his arms with a tenderness that made her heart ache. She saw the tears on his cheeks, the tremble in his hands, the way he looked at this new life like she was the most precious thing in the world. She is beautiful, he whispered, just like her mother. Clara smiled through her own tears. She is ours. Sam sat beside her on the bed, Hope cradled between them, and for a moment everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as it should be. Then Thomas appeared in the doorway, his face alight with wonder. Is that my sister? He asked. It is, Clara said. Come and meet her. The other children crowded in, Sarah and the twins and Rose, all of them wanting to see, wanting to touch, wanting to be part of this moment. Baby William, not so much a baby anymore, climbed onto the bed and peered at Hope with solemn curiosity. She is small, he observed. She will grow, Sam said, just like you did. William considered this, then nodded. Okay, I will teach her things. Everyone laughed and the sound filled the cabin warm and bright and full of love. October brought the harvest and the wedding. They held the ceremony in the yard under a canopy of golden leaves with the mountains rising in the distance and the sky a deep, endless blue. The children stood in a row, scrubbed and dressed in their best clothes. Ruth had come from town. Even old Pete Hansen made the journey, his weathered face creased with smiles. The preacher from Hebron spoke the words, and Clara listened, her hand in Sam's, her heart overflowing. Do you, Samuel Brennan, take this woman to be your wife? To have and to hold in sickness and in health for richer or poorer, until death do you part? I do, Sam said. His voice was steady, his eyes never leaving Clara's face. And do you? Clara Whitmore, take this man to be your husband? To have and to hold in sickness and in health for richer or poorer, until death do you part? Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here, the years of fear and pain, the terrible winter that had nearly killed them all, the stranger who had stopped when no one else would, the love that had grown from gratitude into something deeper, something real. I do, she said. The preacher smiled. Then by the power vested in me I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Sam cupped her face in his hands and kissed her gentle and sweet and full of promise. The children cheered. Ruth wiped tears from her eyes. Pete Hansen let out a whoop that echoed off the mountains. And Clara, standing in the arms of the man she loved, surrounded by the family they had built together, felt something settle into place inside her, something that had been broken for a very long time. Home. Real home. The kind that lasted forever. The years that followed were not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers. There were illnesses and injuries and setbacks. There were nights when Clara lay awake worrying about money or the children or the future. But there was also joy, so much joy. She watched her children grow. Thomas became a fine young man, strong and capable with his father's quiet competence and his mother's stubborn heart. Sarah blossomed into a beautiful woman, her early wariness transformed into wisdom and compassion. The twins Emma and Eliza grew into spirited young ladies who could outride and outshoot half the men in the territory. William, no longer a baby at all, proved to have a gift for numbers and was already talking about going to college back east. Rose, the child who had come to them from tragedy and loss, became Clara's shadow and confidant. She never forgot where she came from, but she never doubted where she belonged. She was a Brennan now in every way that mattered. And Hope, their youngest, grew into a child as bright and beautiful as her name. She had Sam's eyes and Clara's smile and a spirit all her own. Sam built them a bigger house as the years passed, adding rooms as the family grew. He worked the land and raised cattle and became known throughout the territory as a man of his word. People came to him for advice, for help, for the kind of steady leadership that could not be bought or faked. And Clara, the woman who had once been so desperate and alone, became the heart of their community. She taught the neighbor children to read. She organized church socials and barn raisings. She sat with the sick and comforted the grieving. She became the person others turned to in times of trouble because she knew what trouble looked like and how to survive it. One evening, many years later, Clara stood on the porch of their home and watched the sun set behind the mountains. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and purple, the same colors it had been on that terrible winter day when she had thought all hope was lost. Sam came up beside her and took her hand. His hair was gray now, his face lined with age, but his eyes were the same, steady, kind, full of love. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Clara leaned into him, feeling his warmth, his strength, the solid presence that had anchored her for so many years. "I am thinking about how far we have come," she said, "about everything we have built." Sam nodded, his gaze sweeping over the land they had tamed, the home they had made the children and grandchildren who filled their lives with noise and laughter and love. "It is a good life," he said. "It is." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the light fade, watching the stars emerge one by one. From inside the house came the sounds of family children laughing, someone playing piano, the clatter of dishes being washed. Clara thought about the woman she had been all those years ago, desperate, broken, ready to give up. She thought about the moment Sam had appeared out of the snow, a stranger with kind eyes and steady hands. She thought about all the choices they had made since then, all the obstacles they had overcome, all the love they had built from nothing. "Sam," she said softly. "Yes, thank you. For stopping. For staying. For everything." Sam lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you for letting me," he said. Clara smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. The evening settled around them soft and peaceful, full of the quiet contentment that comes from a life well lived. She had not been saved, she realized. Not really. She had been given a chance and she had taken it. She had fought for her family, for her home, for herself. She had learned to trust again, to love again, to hope again. And now, standing here in the gathering darkness, surrounded by everything she had built, she knew the truth. This was not the end of her story. It was just the beginning. The light caught on the edges of the valley, glowing with the kind of quiet hope that does not shout, but grows slowly, deeply, and lasts forever. And for the first time in her life, Clara Whitmore Brennan believed in forever. She had been chosen, and she had chosen back. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.